Ladies and gentlemen, today we're here to discuss a champion that I actually had in my top 10 most overrated champions list. And of course, that champion, it's in the title, it's in the thumbnail, it's infamous Iron Man, who in my opinion is the definition of how hype kills a character. Not saying that he's bad, of course, the title is literally why you should play, meaning that I do think the champion is good and would actually recommend you to take them up to a certain level. But is he actually that bad of a champion? Let's actually go over all of his abilities first before we answer that question. Infamous Iron Man cannot land critical hits. He instead inflicts an instant shock which deals energy damage equal to the damage it would have done if it was a critical hit. If the opponent would gain 2 or more prowess effects at once, those prowesses would then be converted into a single indefinite energy vulnerability debuff, which reduces their energy resistance by a certain amount, and each subsequent debuff is 10% less potent than the previous one. He starts each fight with an indefinite armor up buff, which grants him a certain amount of armor rating, and while he has this buff, he's immune to shock as well as incinerate. If the buff is lost, it'll then restore itself after 12 seconds, and this timer is paused while he's suffering from an armor break. But onto his basic attacks. His medium attacks do not make contact with the opponent and inflict shock debuffs dealing a low amount of energy damage over 2 seconds, and while he's charging his heavy attack, if the opponent is within striking distance and suffering from a shock, all of these shock effects will then be consumed and will be replaced with a passive stun which lasts for 0.6 seconds, and the final hit of the heavy attack will inflict a stacking cowardice debuff which reduces the opponent's special attack damage by 40% for 5 seconds. When one or more shocks are consumed by his abilities, he then triggers his Aura of Iron for 2.6 seconds for each shock that was removed if it's not already active. But speaking of his Aura of Iron passive, it can be triggered while he doesn't have an armor up buff, and its duration is reduced by 4 seconds for each unique non-prowess buff on the opponent. The aura is paused during both champion special attacks, and while it's paused this way, landing a medium attack will end the aura early. While he has the aura, his special attacks are passively unblockable, and each time he inflicts one of his personal shocks while the Aura of Iron is active, it is immediately replaced by an instant energy power burn that burns a percentage of the opponent's current power based on the potency of the replaced shock, which deals a certain amount of energy damage to the opponent per percent of the maximum power burned. He also becomes passively unstoppable and stun immune against the last hit of incoming SP1, SP2, as well as heavy attacks. If the damage exceeds 5% of his maximum health, however, he gains a regen buff which restores access damage over 5 seconds. But moving on to his special attacks, the Special 1. On activation, he enters the Aura of Iron for 8 seconds, and if it was already active, the opponent will then be passively special locked for the remaining duration of the Aura of Iron, the Special 2. After the first hit of the attack lands, he gains additional attack rating for each of the opponent's filled bars of power for the remainder of the attack, and each beam will inflict a shock debuff dealing a certain amount of energy damage over 5 seconds. And last but not least, the Special 3. On activation, he enters the Aura of Iron for 24 seconds, and this aura cannot be ended early, and until it expires, Infamous Iron Man will then be granted a lot of critical rating for each of the opponent's filled bars of power, and if the aura was already active, both he and the opponent will gain an energized passive, increasing their combat power rates by 100%, each lasting until the Aura of Iron next expires. But moving on to his awakened ability, he gains a regen buff healing 5 up to 35% of his maximum health over 10 seconds, and while this effect is active, the opponent is passively special locked. While the Aura of Iron is active, the opponent suffers 100% flat reduced unblockable ability accuracy, and while his personal armor up buff is active, he will then gain additional amounts of block proficiency as well as energy resistance. And that is pretty much it for all of his abilities. A very solid kit, one that revolves around draining the opponent's power and dealing massive amounts of shock damage with his normal combos with his medium attacks as well as the SP2. But moving on to this man's attire, and damn, he is literally rocking that fit, man. Whew. It doesn't stand out at all and it pretty much just looks clean, man. He has a hoodie on which then flows down into a cape, and the hood just makes him look menacing. Like, look at the glowing eyes under it, man. Whew. The profile picture is also very clean, and to be honest, this might be the best looking Iron Man character in the game. Overall, it's clean, doesn't pop out too much except for that other part, so I'll actually give it a 7.5 out of 10. But moving on to the topic of why you should play him. And first off, I would like to talk about the flaws that this champion has. And in my opinion, it's pretty much just three. The first one is sort of a niche thing, but whenever he loses his armor up buff, he pretty much loses all of his abilities, which makes sense when he's a defender. Removing the armor up buff pretty much makes the fight that much easier, but it also reduces the amount of fights that he can actually take as an attacker. You can't actually bring him against Mephisto, for example, and play the fight like you normally would, which yeah, I sort of get it, but it could have been possible, man. Problem number two is his damage in normal scenarios. We all know how good his damage is when it comes to fighting prowess-based champions, and especially because of this ability, which allows him to place an indefinite energy vulnerability debuff, which means he'll be doing more damage. But what about against normal champions? There's just going to be a lot better options to bring, and this specifically is a problem when you're only spamming the SP2s and not going for the SP3 rotation, but I guess it sort of balances itself out. Since he can power drain with the SP2, I guess it's okay. And problem number three is that he's not a 7-star. I forgot the real reason, so we'll just keep it as that. Imagine how good this dude would be as a 7-star. I feel like they might even add him into the next Titan Crystal cause he's pretty much just a perfect candidate, right? His damage is too low as a 6-star, so him being able to be ranked up all the way to rank 3 as a 7-star, the numbers are gonna be crazy. But that's pretty much it for the negatives. As for the positives, he's a very safe as well as reliable champion, especially when it comes to his awakened ability, which heals you when you're about to die. He's also pretty good when it comes to power draining the opponent, which is a very unique thing, but unfortunately we have future Ant-Man for that now. The immunities are also very unique as well as very powerful. The damage in general is also very good, even when you don't go for the SP3 and decide to just spam the SP2s, considering that you're also draining the opponent's power in the process. Like I said, it sort of evens itself out. When you go for the SP3 rotation, that's when you see the most amount of damage, of course. The reason why I said in the beginning that he's the definition of how hype ruins a character is the fact that he sort of has a bad image to his name now. For a character named Infamous, he sure was popular back then, right? And it's not specific to him alone. There's also a lot of other champions that sort of have a bad image to their name. But if you were there around the time when he was dropped, then you know how overhyped this champion was. And that's pretty much it for Infamous Iron Man. Let me know down in the comments who next I should make a video on. Make sure to join my Discord group, the link will be down in the description. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace!
2024 backwards is rough. I'm sorry for saying that.